This video explores scientific ideas and biblical perspectives about death for educational and storytelling purposes. You may believe death feels like instant silence, but the first moments could be more complex than most people expect. Imagine your heart suddenly stops, yet your brain does not shut down immediately, creating a brief window of transition. In those seconds, your body becomes still, but internal processes may continue working in ways you never considered before. Science suggests the brain can remain active briefly, meaning awareness may not disappear as instantly as people assume. This does not mean full consciousness remains, but it introduces a short phase where perception may still exist. Now, imagine experiencing that transition, not as fear, but as an unfamiliar shift away from everything you once recognized. Your senses may change, your awareness may fade gradually, and your sense of time may begin to feel different. Instead of a sudden ending, it may feel like moving through a quiet and steady transformation. That transformation is where many questions begin, especially about what remains and what fades away first. Now consider another perspective that has existed for centuries across religious and philosophical traditions. According to the Bible, death is described not as an end, but as a transition into another form of existence. This suggests that what happens in those moments may not be limited only to physical changes in the body. Instead, it may involve a deeper process that connects both biological changes and spiritual interpretations. That idea introduces curiosity rather than fear, encouraging a closer look at what actually happens during those minutes. Because if death is a process, then those first moments may hold more meaning than most people realize. They may represent a boundary between life as you know it and something entirely unfamiliar. Understanding that possibility can change how you think about both life and what comes after it. And everything begins in the first minute, when the body stops, but the process is only just starting. As the first minute begins, your heart has stopped, and your body enters a gradual and natural shutdown process. Blood circulation ceases completely, and oxygen delivery to the brain begins decreasing in a steady and unavoidable manner. Despite this change, the brain does not stop immediately, and some level of activity may continue briefly. This creates a short, transitional phase where internal systems are still adjusting, even though the body appears completely still. Your senses may begin to change as oxygen levels drop, altering how your brain processes incoming signals from the environment. Vision may narrow slightly, and sounds may feel more distant as perception gradually shifts away from normal awareness. This is not a sudden or dramatic experience for most cases, but rather a subtle and progressive internal transition. The brain may enter a different state, where activity becomes less organized but has not fully stopped functioning yet. During this time, your body is no longer responsive, but internal biological systems are still completing final processes. This phase is often described as a natural transition rather than a sharp or clearly defined ending point. Cells begin to lose function gradually, not all at once, which contributes to the slow nature of this process. Your breathing has already stopped, yet the brain may still be responding to the absence of oxygen briefly. This creates a unique moment where the body and brain are no longer fully aligned in their activity patterns. Now imagine experiencing this moment as a quiet shift, rather than something overwhelming or difficult to process. Your awareness may begin to soften, becoming less focused and more distant from the physical environment around you. Instead of clear thoughts, there may be fragmented impressions or fading sensations during this short period of transition. Time perception may begin to change, making seconds feel slightly extended or less clearly defined than usual. This is not fully understood, but reflects how the brain reacts when normal function is gradually interrupted. At the same time, the sense of control begins to fade, as the body no longer responds to conscious intention. You are not actively doing anything, but moving through a process that continues independently of your control. This moment raises an important question about whether awareness continues briefly during this transitional phase. Science does not provide a definite answer, but it suggests some level of activity may still be present. Now consider how this supports the idea that death may be a gradual process rather than an instant event. It suggests that the first minute is part of a transition, not simply a final and immediate endpoint. According to some perspectives, this moment may also mark the beginning of a deeper shift beyond the body. That idea connects biological understanding with broader interpretations about what death may represent in a larger sense. Because even as the body becomes inactive, the experience of that transition may not end immediately. Instead, it may continue briefly, moving step by step toward a complete and quiet stillness. And this is only the first minute, where the process begins, but has not yet fully reached its conclusion. As the second minute begins, your body has already lost function, yet your brain may still remain briefly active. Even without a steady oxygen supply, neurons can continue firing for a short time before gradually slowing down. This creates a final stage of activity where the brain continues processing signals, though not in a stable or coordinated way. You are no longer fully conscious in the normal sense, but some level of internal awareness may still be present. This moment is often described as a transition phase rather than a complete and immediate loss of perception. Your brain begins reorganizing activity, producing irregular patterns that differ significantly from normal waking or sleeping states. These patterns may create unusual sensations, including subtle Some researchers suggest this phase may help explain why certain individuals report vivid experiences during near-death situations. These experiences vary widely between individuals, and science has not yet reached a unified explanation for them. Now imagine being in that state, where your body is inactive, yet your brain is still generating internal signals. You cannot move or respond to the environment, but something within you may still be processing what is happening. This does not imply full awareness remains, but it introduces the possibility of a brief internal experience. Your perception of time may begin to change, making seconds feel longer or less clearly structured than before. Thoughts may no longer form clearly, but fragments of memory or sensation could still appear and fade quickly. This creates a mental state that is neither fully conscious nor completely absent of awareness or perception. Your brain is no longer functioning as a unified system, but as separate regions shutting down at different times. That gradual shutdown contributes to the fragmented nature of any remaining perception during this short stage. You are no longer interacting with the external world, but internal processes may still be briefly active. This raises an important question about the nature of consciousness and whether it depends entirely on brain activity. Science often suggests consciousness is closely linked to neural processes, but this stage introduces some uncertainty, because if awareness lingers even briefly, then the end of consciousness may not be as immediate as expected. Now consider another perspective discussed across philosophical and religious traditions for thousands of years. According to the Bible, death is not described as a sudden disappearance, but as a transition into another state. This suggests that what is happening may not be limited only to physical processes within the brain itself. Instead, it may involve a deeper shift that goes beyond what science can currently observe or measure. This idea does not replace scientific understanding, but offers an additional perspective on what this moment represents. Because even as the brain slows down, the concept of awareness may not be fully explained or understood. Now imagine that what you are experiencing is not only biological, but part of a broader transition process. A transition that moves from physical processes into something less clearly defined and more abstract in nature. This does not confirm any single explanation, but it opens space for reflection and deeper consideration. Because the second minute may not represent a complete ending, but rather a continuation of an ongoing process. Your brain is slowing down, your awareness is fading, yet something about the experience may still remain briefly. And that brief moment is what makes this stage important when trying to understand the nature of death itself, because it suggests that the transition is gradual, not instant, and possibly more complex than commonly assumed. And this is only the second minute, where the brain remains active while moving steadily toward complete stillness. As the third minute begins, your brain is entering a critical stage where overall activity becomes weaker and less coordinated. Oxygen levels have dropped further, and neurons are gradually losing their ability to communicate in stable and organized pattern. This causes awareness to become less clear as the systems supporting perception begin to lose their normal structure. You are no longer thinking in a focused or linear way, but experiencing a gradual fading of mental clarity. This is not an instant disappearance, but a progressive shift where awareness slowly becomes less defined over time. Your perception of reality may feel distant, as if the connection between you and the physical world is weakening. Visual impressions, if present, may appear fragmented, while sounds may lose their clarity and recognizable structure. Your brain is no longer integrating information effectively, leading to a sense of disconnection from normal experience. This stage can be understood as a transition from organized awareness into a more diffuse and less structured state. You are not fully aware in the usual sense, yet something within you may still register subtle internal changes. This creates a unique condition where awareness is fading, but not completely absent in every moment. Your sense of identity may begin to weaken, as the brain struggles to maintain a consistent sense of self. Thoughts may appear briefly and disappear quickly, without forming complete or meaningful patterns of understanding. This reflects how different parts of the brain are shutting down at slightly different times and speeds. As coordination decreases, the experience becomes less stable and more difficult to interpret or recognize clearly. Time perception may continue to shift, making moments feel extended or compressed in ways that differ from normal awareness. This change reflects how the brain processes information differently when normal function is gradually interrupted. At this stage, your body is no longer involved in experience, and internal activity becomes the primary focus. You are not interacting with the outside world, but rather moving through an internal process of gradual transition. This raises an important question about when awareness truly ends and how that moment can be defined. Science does not provide a precise boundary, because consciousness fades gradually rather than stopping instantly. This uncertainty is what makes this stage both complex and difficult to fully explain in clear terms. Now consider how this aligns with perspectives that view death as a transition rather than a sudden ending. According to the Bible, this stage may represent a moment where the spirit begins separating from the body. This interpretation suggests that the fading of brain activity may not represent the complete end of awareness. Instead, it may mark the beginning of a different form of existence beyond physical processes. This idea introduces a deeper layer of meaning into what might otherwise be seen as purely biological change. Because even as the brain becomes less active, the concept of awareness may not be fully limited to it. Now imagine that this fading is not simply loss, but part of a larger transition process, a process that moves from physical awareness into something less defined but still significant in nature. This does not confirm any single explanation, but encourages reflection on what this moment might represent. Because the third minute may not be the end, but a continuation of a process already in progress. Your awareness is fading, your brain is slowing, yet the transition is not fully complete at this stage. And this is only the third minute, where consciousness becomes weaker while the process continues forward. As the fourth minute begins, your body has largely completed its shutdown, yet the idea of transition becomes more important than before. At this stage, most biological systems have lost coordination, and the brain is approaching a point where activity becomes minimal. However, many perspectives suggest this moment is not only about the body, but about a deeper change in existence. According to the Bible, death is described as a separation between the physical body and the spirit within. This idea presents death not as disappearance, but as a movement from one state of being into another form. The body returns to the physical world, while the spirit is understood to continue beyond that physical limitation. This interpretation does not focus on fear, but on the concept of transition and continuity beyond visible reality. Now, imagine this moment not as an ending, but as a shift away from the physical structure you have always known. You are no longer defined by your body, and the connection to physical senses has already become extremely limited. This creates a condition where awareness, if present, is no longer tied to normal sensory input or physical interaction. Instead, it may exist in a form that is difficult to describe using everyday human language or understanding. Some interpretations suggest this stage may involve a form of awareness that is no longer constrained by the body. This does not imply clarity or confusion specifically, but rather a different mode of existence altogether. Now consider how different this is from the idea that death is simply an immediate and total absence of experience. If transition is occurring, then this moment may represent a boundary rather than a final point of ending. That boundary separates what you have known throughout life from something entirely unfamiliar and unexplored. The concept of separation is central here, not as loss, but as movement from one condition into another. This perspective encourages reflection rather than assumption about what may occur during this stage. Because if the body has already completed its process, the focus shifts toward what may continue beyond it. Now imagine that what defines you is no longer limited to physical structure or biological activity. That idea introduces a broader understanding of existence that goes beyond scientific measurement alone. This does not contradict science, but adds another layer of interpretation based on long-standing belief systems. According to biblical teaching, this stage may represent the beginning of a journey beyond physical life. This journey is not described in exact detail, but it is understood as a continuation rather than an ending. That continuation may involve awareness, though its nature is not clearly defined in measurable terms. Now consider how this possibility changes the meaning of those final minutes after physical life ends. They are no longer simply biological, but may also carry significance beyond the physical dimension. This does not confirm a specific outcome, but it highlights the importance of considering multiple perspectives. Because the fourth minute may represent more than shutdown, it may represent transition in a broader sense. Your body is no longer active, yet the question of what continues remains open and deeply significant. This is where science becomes less certain, and interpretation becomes an important part of understanding. Because what happens at this stage cannot be fully observed, only explored through different perspectives. And this is only the fourth minute, where the body has ended its function, but the transition may continue. As the fifth minute approaches, the physical process is nearly complete, yet the question of what follows becomes more central. If the body has fully stopped functioning, attention shifts toward what may continue beyond physical life and measurable activity. According to the Bible, this stage is often understood as a transition into a different state of existence. This transition is not described as random movement, but as a directed change toward a specific condition or destination. Some interpretations suggest an immediate awareness of this change, while others describe a more gradual recognition of it. This introduces a complex idea that the experience may differ depending on perspective and interpretation. Now imagine being no longer connected to your body, yet possibly still aware in a different way. That awareness would not depend on physical senses, but may exist in a form beyond normal human understanding. This creates a shift where perception is no longer tied to sight, sound, or touch as experienced in life. Instead, awareness may take on a different quality that is difficult to describe using familiar language. Some traditions describe this stage as peaceful, while others emphasize reflection and awareness of one's life. This suggests that the experience may not be identical for everyone, but shaped by different interpretations. Now, consider how this idea contrasts with the belief that nothing remains after the body stops functioning. If awareness continues in any form, then the transition becomes an experience rather than an absence. That possibility changes how the final moments are understood and how they connect to what comes next. According to biblical perspectives, this stage may involve a form of separation from the physical world. This separation is not described as loss alone, but as movement into a different state of existence. The exact nature of that state is not fully defined, which leaves room for interpretation and reflection. Now imagine becoming aware of that transition, even if only briefly, without the structure of the physical body. This would represent a moment where identity is no longer tied to biological systems or physical limitations. Instead, it may exist in a form that reflects something deeper than the body itself. This idea raises important questions about what defines identity and whether it exists beyond physical structure. Science does not provide a clear answer, but it acknowledges that this stage cannot be fully measured, because once the body has stopped, observation becomes limited, and interpretation becomes more significant. Now, consider how this stage connects to broader beliefs about life, meaning, and continuation beyond death. If existence continues, then this moment becomes part of a larger process, rather than a final conclusion. That process may involve awareness, though its form is not clearly defined or universally agreed upon. This uncertainty is what makes this stage both complex and meaningful to explore carefully, because it invites reflection without forcing a single explanation or conclusion about what occurs next. Now imagine reaching that point where the body is no longer active, yet the question of continuation remains. That question becomes central, not as fear, but as curiosity about the nature of existence itself. Because the fifth minute may represent a transition point rather than a complete and final ending. And that possibility changes how those first minutes after death are understood in a broader context. They are no longer only biological events, but part of a larger discussion about existence and awareness. And this is the fifth minute, where the process reaches its physical end, but the question of continuation remains. As the process reaches this stage, the central question becomes whether consciousness continues beyond the limits of the physical body. Science often explains consciousness as a product of brain activity, suggesting it fades as neural processes gradually stop functioning. However, this explanation does not fully resolve what happens during the final transitional moments already described earlier. Some studies suggest brief activity may continue, which raises questions about how awareness relates to physical system. This creates a space where certainty becomes limited, and multiple interpretations begin to exist side by side. Now imagine that consciousness is not entirely produced by the brain, but influenced by it during life. If that were true, then the end of brain activity might not immediately remove all forms of awareness. Instead, It could represent a change in how awareness exists, rather than a complete disappearance of it. This idea is not confirmed scientifically, but it has been explored in philosophy and theology for centuries. According to the Bible, consciousness is closely connected to the soul, which is believed to continue beyond physical death. This suggests that awareness may not be fully dependent on biological processes within the brain alone. Instead, it may exist in a form that continues beyond the limits of physical structure and measurable activity. Now, consider how this possibility changes the meaning of those final moments after the body becomes inactive. They are no longer simply the end of awareness, but may represent a transformation of how awareness exists. This transformation may not be clearly understood, but it introduces a deeper level of reflection, because it challenges the assumption that consciousness disappears instantly once the body stops functioning. Instead, it suggests that awareness may change form, rather than completely vanish without any continuation. This idea remains uncertain, yet it continues to be discussed across scientific and philosophical perspectives. Now imagine that awareness continues briefly, even if it is not in the same form as during life. That would mean the final moments are not empty, but part of an ongoing process of transition. This does not confirm a specific outcome, but it highlights the importance of questioning simple assumptions, because the nature of consciousness remains one of the most complex subjects in both science and philosophy. And this stage represents the point where that complexity becomes most visible and difficult to define clearly. According to biblical perspectives, awareness continues as part of the soul, which is not limited to the body. This introduces a different way of understanding existence, one that extends beyond physical measurement. Now consider how this idea affects the way you interpret the meaning of life and death together. If awareness continues, then existence may not be limited to the time spent within the physical body. Instead, it may represent part of a larger process that continues beyond what can be directly observed. This perspective does not eliminate scientific explanation, but adds another layer of interpretation to consider. Because the question is not only how the body stops, but what continues after it has stopped completely. That question remains open, inviting reflection rather than providing a final and definitive answer. Now, imagine reaching that point where the body is inactive, yet the question of awareness still exists. That moment represents a boundary between what is known and what is still uncertain or unexplored. And this is where understanding shifts from observation into deeper reflection about existence itself, because the possibility of continued awareness changes how those final minutes are understood entirely. And this is the stage where the question of consciousness becomes more important than the process itself. Many people move through life believing that death will feel like falling into a deep and completely silent sleep. This belief is comforting because it suggests there is nothing to experience, nothing to process, and nothing to consider afterward. However, this idea may oversimplify a process that appears to be more gradual and complex than commonly assumed. If the transition is not instant, then those first moments may still involve changes in awareness and perception. This does not mean a clear or extended experience, but it introduces the possibility of a brief transitional phase. That phase may include subtle shifts in perception as the brain and body complete their final processes. Now consider how this differs from the assumption that everything ends immediately without any form of continuation. The difference may seem small, but it changes how those final moments are understood and interpreted. Instead of an instant end, it becomes a process that unfolds step by step over a short period of time. This perspective encourages a more careful and thoughtful approach to understanding what happens during those minutes. It also highlights the importance of not relying entirely on simplified explanations when exploring complex topics, because the nature of death involves biological, philosophical, and spiritual perspectives that do not always align perfectly. Now consider how often people avoid thinking about this topic because it feels uncomfortable or uncertain. That avoidance can lead to assumptions that are never examined or questioned in a deeper and more meaningful way. This is why it is useful to explore different viewpoints, even if they do not provide a single clear conclusion. Science offers insight into the physical process, while belief systems provide interpretations beyond the measurable world. Neither perspective fully explains everything, but together they create a broader understanding of the subject. Now imagine approaching this topic not with fear, but with curiosity and a willingness to understand more deeply. That shift in mindset allows you to consider possibilities without needing to accept any single explanation completely. It also helps separate emotional reaction from thoughtful reflection when examining complex and uncertain topics. Because understanding does not always require certainty, but it benefits from careful and balanced exploration. Now consider how this applies to the belief that death is simply an instant and complete absence of awareness. That belief may not be entirely accurate, but it continues because it is simple and easy to accept. In reality, the process may involve stages that are not immediately visible or fully understood. This does not confirm a specific outcome, but it highlights the importance of questioning assumptions, because assumptions can shape how people think about life, meaning, and what happens beyond physical existence. Now imagine realizing that those final moments may hold more significance than previously considered. That realization does not create fear, but invites reflection about the nature of existence itself. It encourages a deeper awareness of how life and death are connected within a larger process. Because if the transition is gradual, then those moments may represent more than just a simple ending. They may serve as a boundary between what is known and what remains uncertain or unexplored. This perspective does not replace belief, but it supports a more thoughtful and balanced understanding, because exploring this topic carefully allows for a clearer view without relying on extreme assumption. And this is why understanding common misunderstandings is important when discussing what happens after death. Those first 5 minutes are often imagined as empty, yet they may represent a gradual sequence of changes rather than an instant ending. From the moment the heart stops, the body begins a natural process, while the brain may remain briefly active. During that short period, awareness may not disappear immediately, but instead begin fading in a gradual and subtle way. This fading does not follow a clear boundary, but unfolds step by step as systems lose coordination over time. What begins as physical change may also raise deeper questions about perception, identity, and the nature of awareness itself. Science explains much of the biological process, yet it does not fully define the exact moment awareness ends completely. This leaves space for interpretation, where different perspectives attempt to understand what may continue beyond the body. According to the Bible, death is described not as a final disappearance, but as a transition into another state. This interpretation suggests that existence may continue in a form that is no longer tied to physical structure. That idea does not replace scientific understanding, but adds another dimension to how the process is viewed. Now consider how these two perspectives, scientific and spiritual, intersect within those first few minutes. They both describe change, though in different ways, and together they offer a broader understanding of the transition. This transition may not be dramatic or clearly defined, but it represents a shift away from normal human experience. Instead of a sudden ending, it may feel like moving through a quiet and gradual transformation over time. Your awareness, if present, may soften, becoming less focused and less connected to the physical environment. At the same time, the body completes its process, reaching a point where activity can no longer continue. This moment marks the end of physical function, yet the question of continuation remains open and meaningful. Because what follows is not fully observable, it becomes a subject of reflection rather than direct measurement. Now imagine reaching that boundary, where the body is no longer active, yet the idea of existence still remains. That moment does not provide clear answers, but it invites deeper thinking about what life and awareness truly are. It also encourages a more thoughtful approach to understanding the relationship between body, mind, and identity. Because if awareness is more complex than assumed, then its ending may also be more gradual than expected. This does not confirm a specific outcome, but it highlights the importance of exploring different perspectives. Science offers measurable insight, while belief systems offer interpretations that extend beyond observation. Together, they provide a more complete view, even if they do not fully answer every question involved. Now consider how this understanding may influence the way you think about life in the present moment. If the transition is gradual, then those final minutes may hold more meaning than previously considered. They may not be something to fear, but something to understand with clarity and perspective. Because understanding removes confusion, and clarity allows for a more balanced view of complex topics. Now imagine reflecting on this not as an ending, but as part of a larger and continuous process. A process that begins with life, continues through change, and leads into something not yet fully understood. That perspective does not demand belief, but encourages awareness and thoughtful consideration, because the meaning of those 5 minutes may not lie in certainty, but in the questions they raise. And those questions may ultimately shape how you understand both life and what follows beyond it.